My name is Nora. I am 28 years old. An age where the world expects you to have everything figured out. Yet I often feel like a ghost drifting through my own existence. My entire world is contained within the confines of a modest, somewhat cramped apartment tucked away in a corner of the city. It's a space that holds one bedroom, a kitchen barely large enough for two people to stand in, and a silence so thick you can almost feel it against your skin. I live alone, and for the longest time, that solitude was the only thing I truly knew. Every day for me is an exercise in repetition, a loop of gray that never seems to break. My internal clock is set to the mechanical rhythm of a life lived by the numbers. I wake up at 6:00 a.m. sharp, long before the sun has had a chance to burn away the morning mist clinging to the skyscrapers. The first thing I hear isn't the song of birds, but the distant, low hum of traffic and the persistent buzzing of my alarm. I go through the motions like a machine, a quick, hot shower to wash away the dreams of the night, followed by a lonely breakfast. I stand by the counter, staring out at the gray brick of the building next door, chewing on a piece of dry toast and sipping coffee that always seems to go cold before I can finish it. Then, I head to work. I don't just work at any office. I work for a corporate titan, a massive company housed in a building of glass and steel that seems to pierce the clouds. My life there is defined by numbers, spreadsheets, and endless stacks of white paper that smell of ink and cold bureaucracy. I spend 8 hours a day tethered to my desk, my fingers dancing across the keyboard as I navigate the labyrinth of the finance department. At 5:00 p.m., when the sun begins its slow descent, I join the exodus of weary employees. I go home to my quiet apartment and cook dinner for exactly one person. I sit at my small, wooden table, the only sound being the clink of my fork against the plate. I watch TV for an hour, not for the entertainment, but to fill the room with the sound of human voices so I don't have to listen to my own thoughts. Then, I go to bed. I feel lonely most days. It's a hollow ache in the center of my chest that no amount of work can fill. I have no boyfriend to text, no husband to share my burdens with. My parents live hundreds of miles away, and our weekly phone calls are a ritual of bittersweet guilt. They always ask the same question, their voices heavy with the traditional kind of hope. Nora, when will you find someone? When will you get married? You are listening to a story of a heart waiting to be awakened. A narrative of how the most mundane lives can be transformed by a single spark of connection. If you are looking to master the nuances of American English while losing yourself in stories that touch the soul, you have found your home. This is Audiobook English Stories, where every word we speak is a step toward your fluency, and every story is a window into a new life. Stay with us. The gray is about to fade, and Nora's world is about to be painted in colors she never knew existed. I always tell them I don't know. I work hard because work is my armor. It keeps me busy. It keeps me focused. But I know deep down that it's not enough. I want more. I want a life that vibrates with energy. I want to cook for two, to hear the clatter of a shared meal and the warmth of a conversation that lasts long after the plates are cleared. I want a family. I want the chaotic, beautiful noise of children running through my apartment, filling the hallways with laughter instead of this suffocating silence. Sometimes, when the loneliness becomes too much to bear in the quiet of my room, I go to the park on weekends. I sit on an old, weathered bench and simply watch. I see mothers pushing their children on the swings, their faces glowing with a fierce, protective love. I see fathers playing catch with their sons, and couples walking so close their hands naturally find each other. I feel a genuine happiness for them. But for myself, I feel a profound, aching sadness. My friend Tess, who works in the cubicle right next to mine, is always pushing me to live a little. She tells me I need to meet people, to go to bars or clubs, but I'm shy. The idea of walking into a loud, crowded bar makes my heart race for all the wrong reasons. I don't know how to talk to strangers. So I stay home. I tell myself that maybe next year will be different. Maybe next year, someone special will walk into my life and change everything. But for now, my days are just a repeating cycle. Work, eat, sleep, and repeat. This is my quiet, gray life. The company where I work is an architectural marvel of 5 floors, each buzzing with a different kind of ambition. People here move fast, their faces set in expressions of cold, hard seriousness. Phones ring incessantly, and the sound of typing creates a constant, percussive backdrop to our days. Everyone wears nice clothes, expensive suits, and tailored dresses that scream success. In my department, the finance department, there are 20 of us. We sit in a large, open room, our desks arranged in neat, soul-crushing rows. We are the architects of numbers, checking reports and creating spreadsheets that govern the flow of millions of dollars. Then, on a Monday morning that began like every other, everything changed. The big boss, Mark, came down to our floor. Mark was a man of mystery to most of us. He was about 40 years old, a towering figure who always seemed to radiate a cold, untouchable power. His hair was black, shot through with strands of gray that made him look even more imposing. He looked serious all the time, a man who had no room in his life for trivialities. He was the head of our entire department, the one who made the final calls. When he walked in, the air in the room seemed to freeze. People stopped talking mid-sentence. They sat up straighter, their fingers flying even faster across their keys. He usually stayed in his massive office on the top floor. But that Monday, he came to introduce himself to the new staff. I was only 2 weeks into the job. A tiny, insignificant speck in his massive empire. He walked to each desk, shaking hands with a firm, professional grip. When he finally reached my desk, I felt a wave of nerves so strong my hands began to shake uncontrollably. As Mark drew closer to my desk, the air in the finance department seemed to grow thin, as if he were pulling all the oxygen toward him. The rhythmic thud of his expensive leather shoes on the thin office carpet sounded like a countdown in my ears. I kept my eyes fixed on my monitor, staring at a spreadsheet of quarterly projections. But the numbers were dancing and blurring. I could feel the eyes of my coworkers on me, some curious, some pitying. When he finally came to a halt right beside me, his presence felt like a physical weight, a tall shadow that blotted out the fluorescent lights overhead. "You must be Nora," he said. His voice was deep, a low baritone that was surprisingly calm and steady, like a quiet sea that hid immense depth. It wasn't the voice of a man who needed to shout to be heard. I tried to stand, my chair scraping harshly against the floor, and I finally looked up. My heart was thumping so hard against my ribs that I was certain he could see my blouse fluttering. "Welcome to the company," he added, extending a hand. I reached out, my own hand cold and trembling, and felt the warmth and strength of his grip. It was a brief connection, but it felt like a jolt of lightning. I tried to respond, to say something professional and poised, but my voice had abandoned me. "Thank you, Mr. Mark." I finally managed to whisper. My voice sounded small and fragile in that vast room. He didn't pull his hand away immediately. He lingered for a fraction of a second, his dark brown eyes searching mine with a gaze that was professional but intensely observant. His face was a mask of stoicism, showing no trace of a smile, no flicker of emotion. He looked cold, perhaps even unreachable. But as I looked back, I didn't see cruelty. I saw a man who was deeply, profoundly tired. He gave a sharp, curt nod and moved to the next desk, leaving me standing there with my heart racing and my palms sweating. I watched him as he moved down the rows. He knew every single person's name, a feat that seemed impossible for a man who managed hundreds. He asked short, pointed questions about their specific tasks and listened to their stilted answers with an intensity that made everyone nervous. He was the ultimate professional, a man who lived and breathed the success of this company. Once the elevator doors slid shut behind him, the entire floor seemed to exhale a collective breath. Tess immediately rolled her chair over to mine. "That was him," she whispered, her eyes wide with a mix of awe and fear. "That was Mark. He never smiles. And he's a perfectionist. But he's fair. If you work hard and don't make mistakes, he'll respect you. But if you fail, well, don't fail." Every great journey begins with a single moment of recognition. A moment where you decide that you will no longer be invisible. As Nora sets her sights on excellence, we invite you to set your sights on your own goals. Whether you're learning to navigate a new career or mastering a new language, the key is persistence. You are listening to Audiobook English Stories, the home of immersive American English storytelling. If you're enjoying Nora's transformation, don't forget to subscribe and join our community of learners. Now, let's see just how far Nora is willing to go to be noticed. I couldn't stop thinking about that handshake for the rest of the day. His hand had been so firm, so certain, while mine had been weak and shaking. I hated that version of myself. I decided right then that I wanted to be more than just the new girl. I wanted to do work that was so impeccable, so flawless, that even a man like Mark would have to stop and take notice. This was my first real job. My first chance to prove that I wasn't just a girl living in a gray apartment. I was a professional. For the next 3 months, I became a different person. I didn't just work, I obsessed. I was the first one into the office every morning, arriving when the hallways were still dark, and the only sound was the hum of the air conditioning. I stayed late, often until the cleaning crews arrived to empty the trash bins. I checked my reports 3 times, then a 4th time, hunting for even the smallest decimal error or formatting flaw. I wanted Mark to look at my work and see a reflection of his own standards. During those months, I never saw him in person. He stayed in his glass office on the 5th floor, a silent king in a tower of steel. But I knew he was reading our reports. I saw his name on the internal emails. His short, direct messages that left no room for error. Then, everything changed on a Tuesday morning. I had been working on a massive report regarding the company's annual spending. A document hundreds of pages long. It was a labyrinth of data. And as I was cross-referencing last year's figures, I found it a ghost in the numbers. Someone had overlooked 3 major accounts in the final quarter of the previous year. It was a massive error, one that had skewed the company's projections for months. My heart stopped. I stayed until 9:00 p.m. that night, fueled by cold coffee and adrenaline, until I had fixed every single entry and drafted a new, perfect report that accounted for the missing millions. The next morning, the air on our floor felt charged with a strange electricity. Mark didn't go to his office. Instead, he stepped off the elevator and walked straight toward the finance section. He didn't stop at the manager's desk. He walked directly to me. Every head in the department turned. I felt a cold knot of terror tighten in my stomach. "Nora," he said, standing over me, his presence even more intimidating up close. "You found the error in the annual report." I swallowed hard, my voice feeling like a dry leaf. "Yes, sir, I did." He looked at me for what felt like an eternity, his dark eyes unreadable. "Good job," he finally said. Just 2 words, but they hit me with the force of a tidal wave. Not many people would have seen that. Then, for a split second, I saw the corner of his mouth move up a tiny, almost invisible smile. Then he was gone. I felt a surge of pride I had never known. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was seen. For 2 months following that brief good job, I felt as though I was walking on air. The gray walls of the office seemed a little brighter, and the silence of my apartment felt a little less heavy. I had done it. I had caught the eye of the man who saw everything. But as the saying goes, the higher you climb, the harder you fall. It was a miserable Friday afternoon. The kind where the sky outside the glass windows is a dull, bruised purple, and the rain streaks the glass in long, weeping lines. Everyone was exhausted. Their eyes glazed over as they counted down the minutes until the weekend. I was rushing to finish an urgent, high-priority email that contained sensitive, confidential, financial projections. These were the kinds of numbers that could move stock prices. Data that was never intended for anyone outside our executive inner circle. In a moment of pure, mindless haste, Perhaps a slip of the finger or a momentary lapse in focus. I hit the send button. The millisecond the screen refreshed and the message sent notification appeared. My heart didn't just drop, it stopped. I stared at the screen in mounting horror. I hadn't sent the files to my manager. I had accidentally CC'd a major external client. The gravity of the error hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. A cold, prickly sweat broke out across my neck, and I felt the blood drain from my face until I was as pale as the paper on my desk. I had just committed a fireable offense. Within 10 minutes, the phone on my desk rang. It was Mark's personal assistant. Her voice was clipped and professional. But to me, it sounded like a death sentence. Nora. Mister, Mark needs to see you in his office immediately. The walk to the elevator felt like a march to my own execution. My legs were so weak I feared they would buckle beneath me. When I stepped out onto the top floor, the plush carpets and the expensive quiet of the executive level felt suffocating. I entered Mark's vast office. But I couldn't bring myself to look at the spectacular view of the city or the sleek, modern furniture. Mark was sitting behind his massive mahogany desk, his expression an impenetrable mask of granite. Nora, he said, and his voice was a low, terrifying rumble. You sent confidential projections to an external client. I couldn't even form a word of defense. The tears I had been fighting since the moment I hit send finally broke through. I began to sob, my shoulders shaking as I waited for the inevitable for him to tell me to clear my desk and leave the building. In the high-stakes world of international finance, a single mistake can feel like the end of the world. But sometimes, it is in our moments of greatest failure that we discover the true character of those around us. As Nora prepares for the worst, we invite you to take a moment for yourself. You are listening to Audiobook English Stories, where we turn the complexities of the English language into a journey of the heart. If you believe that growth comes from learning, then you belong here with us. Let's see if Mark chooses justice or mercy. But the silence was broken not by a shout, but by the soft click of a desk drawer. I heard the rhythmic thud of his footsteps approaching me. I braced myself, expecting a lecture. But instead, I saw a hand extend into my field of vision, holding a clean, white tissue. Mark didn't loom over me with anger. He waited patiently until my sobbing subsided. Then he did something that humanized him in a way I never thought possible. He moved a chair close to mine and sat down, dropping the barrier of the massive desk between us. Everyone makes mistakes. Nora, he said. His voice had lost its jagged edge. It was soft, human, and anchored in an unexpected empathy. The measure of a professional isn't the absence of mistakes, but how they recover from them. He didn't fire me. He didn't even report me to HR. Instead, for the next 45 minutes, the most powerful man in the company became my personal tutor. He sat with me and walked me through his own meticulous system for double-checking communications. He taught me how to create a digital safety net so that a lapse in focus could never become a catastrophe again. He even shared a story from his own youth, a time when he had made an even larger blunder and his own boss had treated him with cruelty. I promised myself then, he whispered, his dark eyes momentarily distant. That if I ever sat in this chair, I would lead with the patience I was never shown. In that quiet office, surrounded by the shadows of the coming night, the cold boss vanished, and I saw a man with a heart of gold. After that day, everything changed. A new routine began to form a secret rhythm that only the two of us shared, because I still arrived at the office before the sun rose. I began to run into Mark in the small, stainless steel kitchen on our floor. There, amidst the hum of the industrial coffee maker and the soft blue light of dawn, the walls between us began to crumble. He would pour 2 cups of coffee, always remembering that I took mine with just a splash of milk, and we would talk. We didn't talk about quarterly margins or interest rates. We talked about the weather, the books that kept us awake at night, and the strange, beautiful loneliness of a city that never sleeps. One morning, he brought me a leather-bound book from his private collection, telling me he thought I would appreciate its philosophy. I took it home like a sacred relic. I was falling in love with my boss, a man who was 13 years my senior and a world away in status. And for the first time in my life, the gray world was turning into a vibrant, terrifyingly beautiful masterpiece. As the weeks bled into months, my heart became a battleground where hope and reason fought a daily war. My mornings were defined by the scent of fresh coffee and the quiet resonance of Mark's voice in the dim light of the office kitchen. But as soon as the rest of the staff arrived, as soon as the phones began, their relentless shrieking, and the elevators hummed with the weight of hundreds of employees, reality would come crashing back down. I would sit at my desk, staring at the back of his suit as he walked through the department, and remind myself of the cold, hard facts. He was a titan of industry. I was an analyst. He lived in a mansion that overlooked the city. I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment where the heater rattled at night. I told myself that his kindness was just that kindness. I told Thun to stop dreaming of a story that wasn't meant to be written. But a secret like ours, however innocent, has a way of leaving a trail. One Tuesday, while the air in the cafeteria was thick with the smell of grilled paninis and the cacophony of midday gossip, Tess leaned across our small table. Her eyes were narrow, scanning my face like a seasoned detective. "Nora," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the clinking of silverware. "You've changed. You dress differently. You walk differently. And every time Mark's name is mentioned, you go as still as a statue. Tell me the truth, what is going on?" I felt the heat rise from my neck to my cheeks. A crimson confession I couldn't hide. I tried to stutter out a denial, but Tess simply held up a hand. "You don't have to say it, but be careful. He's a lonely man." Nora. Ever since his wife walked out 2 years ago, people say he's forgotten how to be human. They say she left because he was a machine who only cared about the bottom line. Hearing those words felt like a physical ache in my chest. To the world, he was a machine. To the office, he was a cold, calculating force of nature. But I was the only one who had seen him sit on the edge of a desk to comfort a crying employee. I was the only one who knew how he liked his coffee, or the way his eyes softened when he talked about a rare book. I realized then that I wasn't just falling for a boss, I was falling for a man who had been misunderstood by everyone, including himself. I wanted to be the person who reminded him that he was more than just a title. The lines we draw between our professional lives and our personal hearts are often thinner than we care to admit. As Nora navigates the dangerous waters of an office romance, we invite you to take this moment to sharpen your own tools. You are listening to Audiobook English Stories, where we believe that the best way to master American English is to feel the weight and the warmth of the words. If this story is touching your heart, hit that like button and let us know in the comments. We are building a community of learners who believe in the power of a great story. Now, let's return to that golden Thursday evening where everything changed. The feelings grew until they were a tide I could no longer stem. I began to notice every detail, the way he adjusted his tie when he was deep in thought, the faint scent of sandalwood that followed him, and the way he seemed to look for me in a crowded room. Then came a Thursday evening that stayed etched in my memory like a scar. The sun was beginning its slow, dramatic descent, painting the glass skyscrapers in hues of burnt orange and deep violet. The office was nearly empty, the only sound being the distant hum of a vacuum cleaner 3 floors down. I was hunched over my desk, my eyes straining in the dimming light, when I heard those firm, unmistakable footsteps. "Nora," he said. I didn't even have to look up to know it was him. "Are you free? I'd like to speak with you in my office." My stomach did a slow, sickening flip. Was this it? Had the whispers reached his ears? Was he going to tell me that our morning coffees had to stop for the sake of the company? I followed him into the elevator, the silence between us feeling heavy and charged with an electricity I couldn't name. When we reached the top floor, he didn't go to his desk. He walked over to a small, velvet sofa by the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city below was beginning to ignite. Thousands of tiny lights flickering on like a reflection of the stars. He sat down and gestured for me to join him. For a long time, he just stared out at the horizon. My wife was right. "You know," he said, his voice raw and stripped of all its usual authority. "She said I was a man of stone. She said I had replaced my heart with a calculator." He turned to look at me then, and I saw a loneliness so profound it made my breath hitch. I believed her. I lived in a world of gray for 2 years. I thought work was the only thing that would never leave me. But then, you arrived. He took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly, the first time I had ever seen him lose his composure. "You are the only person who sees the man behind the suit. Nora, you bring me a peace I haven't felt in a lifetime. I know this is sudden. I know the world will have its opinions. But I cannot imagine another day of my life without you by my side. Nora, will you marry me?" The words seemed to hang in the air, vibrating against the glass windows of the top-floor office. "Will you marry me?" My brain felt like it had short-circuited. I stared at Mark, searching his face for any sign that this was a misunderstanding. But all I saw was a raw, naked hope that made him look younger and more vulnerable than I ever thought possible. My heart was a chaotic storm. One part of me wanted to scream, yes, until my lungs ached, while the other part was paralyzed by the sheer gravity of what he was asking. I was a 28-year-old analyst, He was the sun around which this entire corporate solar system revolved. I need time to think, I finally whispered, my voice breaking. Tears were already spilling over. Hot and fast. Mark didn't pull away. He didn't look offended. He simply nodded, reached out to gently brush a tear from my cheek, and whispered that he would wait as long as I needed. I left the building that night in a state of total sensory overload. The cool night air felt like ice against my skin, and the neon lights of the city seemed blindingly bright. I spent the next 48 hours in a fever dream. I paced the floor of my tiny apartment until my feet were sore. Staring at the empty chair across from my table, I thought about the whispers that would inevitably follow us, the accusations that I was a social climber, that I had traded my heart for a promotion. I thought about the 13 years between us and the two very different worlds we occupied. I called Tess in the middle of the night, my voice a frantic mess of what-ifs. She listened in silence for a long time before she finally cut through the noise. "Nora," she said, her voice unusually soft. "Stop worrying about the office. Stop worrying about the world. When you're with him, do the colors seem brighter? If the answer is yes, then you already have your answer. At the crossroads of a life-changing decision, fear is the loudest voice in the room. But bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's the realization that something else, something like love, is more important, as Nora prepares to step into a future she never dared to dream of. We invite you to take a step forward in your own journey. You are listening to Audiobook English Stories, the premier destination for immersive American English learning. If this story is helping you find your voice, show us some love by hitting that subscribe button. Every new member of our community helps us keep these narratives alive. Now, let's see the moment Nora chooses her destiny. On Monday morning, before the city had even begun to stir, I was standing outside the heavy oak doors of his office. I didn't wait for his assistant. I didn't wait for an invitation. I walked in, and when he stood up from his desk, his eyes searching mine for a verdict, I didn't say a word. I simply walked across the room and put my hand in his. "Yes," I said, the word feeling, like the first real breath I had taken in years. "I will marry you." The joy that flooded his face was unlike anything I had ever seen. The Ice King was gone, replaced by a man who looked like he had just been handed the keys to the kingdom. We kept the engagement a secret for the first few weeks, a private treasure we held close to our chests. But secrets in a company that size have a half-life. People noticed the way we looked at each other in meetings. They noticed the new, expensive glow in my eyes. The whispers started hushed conversations that died the moment I entered the break room. I had to face my parents next. And that was perhaps the hardest part. My mother was terrified of the age gap, convinced that I was making a mistake I couldn't undo. My father was worried about the power dynamic, afraid that I would lose myself in Mark's shadow. But Mark proved them all wrong. He visited them in their small home, sitting at their kitchen table and listening to their stories with a humility that shocked them. He didn't come as a CEO. He came as a man who cherished their daughter. Slowly, the walls of their doubt began to crumble until, finally, they gave us their blessing. 3 months later, The gray apartment was a memory. We stood at the altar of a small, vine-covered stone church on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't the lavish corporate wedding everyone expected. It was a quiet, sacred promise made in the presence of only our closest friends and family. I wore a simple gown of ivory silk, and as I walked down the aisle, the only person I saw was Mark. When he took my hand, his grip was firm and grounding. His vows weren't written by a lawyer. They were a raw confession of a man who had found his peace. When I said I do, my voice was steady, a clear bell ringing out in the silence of the church. We were no longer boss and employee. We were partners. And as we drove away into the sunset, I realized that the quiet, lonely life I had known was officially over. I was finally, truly home. Looking back now, that lonely woman who lived in the silent apartment feels like a character from a movie I watched a lifetime ago. I remember the cold weight of those solitary dinners and the way the silence used to ring in my ears like a constant reminder of everything I lacked. Everything has shifted. Mark and I have been married for a full year now. And in that time, I have discovered a truth that no textbook or spreadsheet could ever teach me. Love doesn't just provide a partner. It provides a mirror that reflects your own hidden strength. I am no longer that shy, invisible girl who was afraid to take up space. I speak up in boardrooms now. I lead my team with a quiet confidence. And I finally know my own worth. Mark didn't change who I was. He simply loved me until I was brave enough to find the woman who had been hiding under all that fear. As we reach the final pages of Nora and Mark's journey, we want to thank you for walking this path with us. Every story we share is a bridge between the world of language and the world of the heart. If you've found inspiration in these words, or if they've helped you feel a little more confident in your own English journey, please subscribe and join our family at Audiobook English Stories. Your support is the reason we keep telling these tales of transformation. Now, let's see how our story ends. Life as the wife of a man like Mark isn't always a fairy tale. It is real, gritty, and beautiful work. We still have busy days that stretch into the late hours of the night. We still have moments of stress where the corporate world tries to pull us apart. And yes, the office whispers haven't completely vanished, but none of that carries any weight the moment I cross the threshold of our home. Sometimes, the younger women in the department come to my desk and ask for my advice. They see the ring on my finger and they know the legendary story of how the Ice King was thawed. I tell them the truth. Love doesn't follow a corporate hierarchy. It doesn't care about age gaps, or status, or what looks correct on a chart. I tell them to be brave enough to open the door when love knocks, but to be smart enough to ensure that the love is built on a foundation of respect and kindness. Those are the only things that truly matter when the lights go out. Today is our first anniversary, and the morning sun is spilling across our bedroom like liquid gold, painting the walls in hues of honey and amber. I woke up first, watching the city stir to life through the large windows of our home. Inside, everything was peaceful. I watched Mark sleep for a few moments. The man who once looked so untouchable and cold to the rest of the world looks so vulnerable and gentle here with me. I slipped out of bed to prepare a special breakfast, the same coffee and toast that used to be a lonely ritual, but now feels like a sacred celebration. When Mark walked into the kitchen, his hair messy and his eyes soft with sleep. He pulled me into an embrace that felt like the center of the universe. "Happy anniversary," he whispered, his voice like velvet. He gave me a small, velvet box containing a silver necklace with a heart-shaped pendant. On the back, he had engraved 3 words, "My peace." I gave him a watch, with a secret message hidden inside the band, "Every second with you." We spent the rest of the day away from the world of finance, sitting on our sofa and looking through a photo album of our first year together. We saw the wedding photos where my mother was crying happy tears, the messy kitchen sessions where we tried to make pasta from scratch and ended up covered in flour, and the quiet, candid moments that defined us when no one else was watching. In the late afternoon, we walked through the same park where I used to sit on a weathered bench and wish for a miracle. We sat on a blanket, found shapes in the drifting clouds, and laughed until our lungs ached. We even ran into an old friend of mine who looked at our age difference with a lingering, silent judgment. But for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to explain. I simply squeezed Mark's hand and smiled. He is my husband. He is my partner. He is my home. As the sun dipped below the skyline and a gentle rain began to drum against the glass, we sat in our candlelit living room, safe and warm. Mark told me that before I came along, he was only half alive, a ghost in a dark suit. And I realized that we had saved each other. My quiet, gray life is gone, replaced by something loud, happy, and beautifully complicated. Sometimes, life doesn't give you the story you planned. It gives you the one you were always meant to live. Our first anniversary is just the beginning of a story that will take a lifetime to tell. Because when true love finally knocks, it is always worth saying yes. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Audiobook English Stories, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Drop a comment with your favorite line and share this with a friend learning English.